Yeah, thank you.
Our next speaker would be Mr. Matthew Kuiper. Mr. Kuiper completed his bachelor degree in business leadership from Baker College, Cadillac, Michigan. While finishing his master's degree, he began working in the field of dementia care. He is currently working as a dementia care specialist in Penang, Malaysia. His research interests include low-resource communities, ethics, and soul care. He'll be talking today about pursuing a social model for dementia care. Go ahead, Mr. Matthew.
Thank you very much for this invitation. Do I pull up my slides?
Do you want us to share, Doctor?
You can. I guess you can share the slides. That's fine. I'm thrilled to be here this morning. I come from more of a social work background than the rest of the group here, but we definitely have so much to offer when we speak to each other and when we share within disciplines, right? So I'm very grateful for this opportunity to be able to share some of my stories and some of my experiences as a caretaker and as a leader within facilities in the States.
Thank you. So would you like me to share the PPT of you?
If you please. Yes, sir.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. That looks great. So recently, my family experienced the loss of my grandmother. She was 86 years old, and she passed away from a massive stroke after a few months of nursing home care. My parents ended up bringing my grandma home so she could be surrounded by my family in a familiar setting. We have an agency in the States, and I'm not certain how many of your nations use hospice as well. You may be familiar, but it teaches and counsels how to provide end-of-life care for your loved ones. And my parents were very nervous about taking on the care of my grandmother because she was medically fragile, and my parents did not have a medical background. They don't have a nursing background, so they're very uncomfortable with this. However, one of the first things that hospice said to my parents was an affirmation of their ability to handle this. They said, "You can do this. This is something that you are capable of providing your mom, is you can help her finish her days in comfort. She doesn't have to stay in a nursing home." And this was very, very different from the message that we were receiving from the nursing home. The nursing home wanted us to leave the care of my grandmother to the medical professionals. Hospice instead they had a different philosophy of care. They wanted to empower my family to provide care for ourselves, for grandma. And I was really struck by that difference of philosophy and that difference of care. And I believe that dementia currently in the States, and maybe it's going through the same thing in your area, is going through a similar crisis. Is caring for a person with dementia something that's better left for the professionals? Is care for dementia, is that something that's better for like a medical campus, or to have a hired professional come in and sit with your mother and father? Is that the direction we need to take this? And I believe it is the argument of this talk that this is impractical, and with the rising costs of dementia care, as mentioned in the earlier conversations, with the higher life expectancy rates in low resource communities, and the fragility, as we've seen, of the long-term medical campus, we've especially seen this with COVID, medical professionals must lean into providing medically informed social model for dementia care. Now, the medical model, if I can have the next slide, please. The medical model of dementia primarily focuses on the loss of brain function during the various stages of the disease. It focuses on the neurological changes and the brain deterioration, and this is incredibly important for the research and the creation of new drugs. And this is the pathway for a cure and the reverse of the death of brain cells. However, along with this model comes a few weaknesses, such as viewing people with dementia from a position of weakness and loss, instead of viewing how we can integrate them within the communities in which they still live. So the medical model has the tendency to minimize the uniqueness of the individual and provide non-flexible approaches to care, such as the creation of sterile long-term care facilities with uniform rooms, with rigid security practices that really, they have nothing to do with the treatment of the disease, but it's about the minimization of safety risk towards the participants. We don't want the people that we take care of to get injured or hurt, so we put down rigid safety practices. The social model, on the other hand, seeks to be medically informed. We have to have that, but also holistically aware of the various other factors that go into taking care of an individual, such as social, religious, and psychological. Too often, the medical field has minimized the personhood of an individual by focusing on their inability instead of providing tools to capitalize on their remaining gifts and abilities. So I'm pointing at a difference in philosophy. So the danger we all face as caretakers and dementia care professionals is that the longer we're in this industry, we have caretaker burnout. And the more we view the disease instead of looking at the person experiencing the disease. So by knowing the individual, by understanding the disease, by developing better care commitments, we can empower the caretaker to better assist the person experiencing dementia and work towards their flourishing and their overall security. So let's first begin with knowing the individual. I think this is a crucial point. If we wish to treat a person experiencing dementia as a person, we must start with asking the beginning question, what is a person? Are people only physical entities, or is there a metaphysical quality to humanity? Many neuroscientists disagree with the idea that a human being also contains an immaterial part, or the soul. Neuroscientists, they study the brain, they watch neurons fire, they study the processes and conclude, your brain is your brain, and that's all there is to it. The soul cannot be found in the body with any testable measures. So according to Occam's razor, the soul is a fairy tale and does not exist. You may as well be spending your days looking for the American Bigfoot. The brain exists and is an incredibly complicated piece of organic machinery. But I believe that neuroscience is the wrong category to discover the dimensions and the existence of the soul. The brain is the physical meaty part, but the soul, or the consciousness of man, is the immaterial part. It's like trying to measure willpower with a microscope. Certain categories of humanity cannot be investigated through physical inspection. Examples of other non-physical parts of man are his sensations, his thoughts, his beliefs, his desire, or his acts of will. Although we know that the prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that helps with self-discipline and making decisions, neuroscientists are not able to dig around in the brain to determine how much self-discipline one person has versus another. Another example is intellect versus knowledge. A person may know exactly what it is like to ride on a train, but until he rides on a train in Delhi, perhaps, he's not going to understand. Simulations are beneficial, but until the actual event takes place, a person does not have an authentic knowledge of the experience. I could talk you through every aspect of climbing mountains in Malaysia, but until you go through the experience yourself, you won't fully understand the sensation. So an argument against making a distinction between the brain and the immaterial or the soul is Alzheimer's disease, because in Alzheimer's disease, seemingly the body does influence the soul. As the brain fibers twist and tangle into knots, the soul seemingly disappears. Often the only thing left of a person, we think, is a decaying shell. However, anyone working with people with dementia will quickly tell you that although physical changes have taken place within the body, incredibly, certain stimuli can bring the mind or the soul out of hiding. And I'm sure you have seen these experiences yourself and watched these videos, such as music or painting or dance or art seemingly, or smells seemingly beat back the shadows. And just for a few minutes, the personality is returned. J.P. Moreland stated in a lecture at Biola, just because in Alzheimer's, the mind depends on the brain to work, that doesn't prove the mind is the same thing as the brain any more than the engine, depending on the starter to work, proves that the engine is the same thing as the starter. So the mind or the soul may be lulled to sleep by the disease, but it partially can be revealed through certain physical touches, through certain stimuli. Taking care of people with Alzheimer's disease has fully convinced me of the existence of the soul, because although the brain does go through decay, the core of the individual remains the same. So it is vital to see that people, whether suffering from dementia or not, contain these material and immaterial parts, body and soul. Dementia and Alzheimer's by no means strips a person fully of their personhood. Their nature instead goes into hiding because of the progression of the disease. I always remember, this is one of the experiences I had working at a long-term care facility, was I had a man by the name of Bob, and I was told repeatedly by his wife, please have Bob pray during your time of scripture reading. Bob's mental ability was limited at this time, and I expected little from his oratory ability. And it took me weeks to ask him to pray, because I was worried that he was going to embarrass himself in front of his peers. But when I finally got around to asking him to pray, after repeated prompting from his wife, this says no, this is not to my credit, Bob opened up his mouth and Bob's soul came through. It was a beautiful, heartfelt confession of sin with eloquent words of gratitude for God's favor in his life. It amazed me that Bob, who was barely able to form a coherent sentence, now could pray eloquent sentences and paragraphs of his heart out to the Lord. A person with Alzheimer's disease or other forms of dementia is not less of a person because of the disease. In fact, many of these people could be living in a far richer and fulfilling life, but they are hindered by the perspectives of others and their own physical environment. So a helpful step to take in our advocacy for people with dementia is to realize that people with dementia are not only sick, but instead they are disabled. Only thinking about this disease as a medical problem to be diagnosed and treated leads to ignoring the environmental issues that can be fixed in our communities. I'm on the next slide, if you don't mind, please. Steps can be taken to help people with dementia in their everyday lives, such as sick people, they need medicine, they need doctors, they need medical treatment. However, dementia not only affects an individual's body, but also how they relate towards their community. Even as people who are blind need assistance to be able to navigate a numerical keypad, and they use Braille. People with dementia can be assisted to better relate and adapt to their surroundings. Considering how a person with dementia interacts with their environment is known as the social model of disability. By understanding the disease better, we can create tools like Braille and a wheelchair to assist participation with their surroundings. If I can go to the next slide, please, to understanding the disease. Sorry about this. Okay. So when I was a young boy, we had a lady in church, and the terminology back then was she was going senile, was what she was called, what this was called. She would leave her house in the middle of the night naked, and she would wander off into the cold. And I was confused by this, by a young man. I've never experienced this before. What was a little old lady 80-some years old, wandering through the streets of my hometown naked. I was told that she was going senile. It was causing her to lose her mind or just get sick, and no one really knew how to handle the situation. Her sons moved her into a care home, but before long, she had escaped, and she was back out into the cold streets again. Her son brought her to church a few more times, and I remember looking at her. I was puzzling over the simple look on her face and wondering what had possessed this lady. She didn't seem like a crazy person. She didn't seem like she enjoyed to get naked out in the snowy nights. Instead, she looked like a sweet lady who was more likely to offer me a piece of candy and a cheek pinch than partake in a wild romp in the streets. She eventually moved into a more secure, locked-down nursing home and ended up finishing her days there. The story stuck with me as to what was going on in her mind. We know now, thanks to the neuroscientist that I disagreed with a little bit earlier, this lady was not just getting old or senile, but she had Alzheimer's disease, which causes the disintegration of brain cell connections and the death of brain cells, which leads to the loss of mental faculties and the shrinking of brains. So, and I'm sure the doctors here could do a much better job of defining it, if you will excuse me for that hasty definition. One of the expressions of this disease, of this death of neurons, is a loss of memory, which typically begins in the hippocampus. Therefore, memory loss is usually one of the first indicators of dementia. However, there are many other different types of dementia, such as frontal lobe, Lewy body, vascular dementia, AIDS dementia, etc. Wherever the neurons start dying, effects of the disease are seen. For instance, I took care of a lady with frontal lobe dementia, and she functioned normally, but she could not form any words. Her brain was injured to the point that her communication abilities were gone. She would chatter, she would coo, she would laugh, but her words did not make any sense, as she was just babbling. This babbling was brought on because the results of the frontal lobe dementia. Part of her brain factory was shut down. I know of another lady who could speak perfectly, but her brain was injured to the point that she could not understand any communication. All communication with her had to come through visual cues instead of verbal prompting. And she was constantly frustrated because she thought all of her friends were speaking gibberish. So stacks of books and articles have been written on the science and the mind of the diseases, and perhaps you've written some yourself. If you're interested in a deeper dive, I really appreciated Dr. Joseph Jabelli's In Pursuit of Memory, or my friend Dr. Ben Mast, who wrote Second Forgetting. The important thing to understand about the disease is that the effects of dementia are not a normal part of aging. And this is very important as we try to communicate. Firm Foundation tries to communicate with low resource communities, is stressing that this isn't an evil spirit, but instead is a disease, and it's not normal, and it's not a spirit. Although it is perfectly normal to lose some mental acuity as we age, the damage done to the brain due to Alzheimer's disease is far from normal. Also, the behaviors exhibited by someone with dementia are caused by damage to that brain. The brain of a person with dementia is not functioning properly, so it should be expected that irrational behavior takes place. Judy Cornish writes in her article, and she's the founder of the Dawn Method. She helpfully writes in her article, Mean Dementia, Why Does That Happen? Dementia takes away our rational thinking skills. Expecting people to use them and be reasonable or rational is no different than expecting someone who is blind to see or deaf to hear. So dementia affects the brain in such a way that a person with dementia struggles with rational thought. Therefore, it is pointless to try to argue with someone with dementia over anything, as you may have experienced. The little old lady I mentioned in the beginning of this article did not need to hear that it would be better for her to stay inside and not run around naked. Her other thinking system, the intuitive system, instead is screaming inside her that she is uncomfortable, that she is insecure, and she definitely needs to get out of there. So as we turn from thinking about dementia only as a sickness and begin to think of the social ramifications as well, we can begin to create tools to help us and our community better care for those with dementia. If the rational mind is no longer performing correctly and the intuitive mind is taken over, then we need to think through our approach. So let's begin with building better care commitments. A common symptom of those impaired with dementia is difficulty finding the right word. Oftentimes, the person with dementia will struggle and fight with his vocabulary to make a complete sentence. A person may end up choosing a similar word and expect the caretaker to understand completely, and that is frustrating for both. This can be incredibly frustrating. The one with a healthy mind does not understand what the person with dementia is trying to say, and the person with dementia does not understand why his demands are not being met. Here's a humorous example of this situation. One of my dear residents, Mr. Gill, was put on oxygen because of his breathing problems. And the doctor prescribed a rolling oxygen tank that was on wheels and that could be pushed beside him. So it had two wheels and had a customary geriatric gray aluminum casing. Maybe you have some of these in your area. The tank was a bright thermos green and had a thin, clear oxygen line that ran from the rolling tank to underneath his nose. Those who need additional oxygen often have a small indentation underneath their nose due to the frequency of use. However, Mr. Gill had no such indentation because he was just getting used to his oxygen tank. He didn't like it. The doctor had ordered the tank to always be brought alongside with him for the sake of his poor breathing. Unfortunately, Mr. Gill would have nothing of it. I would often find this oxygen tank in strange places all over the facility. I'd find it in the bathroom closet. I would find it behind a rose bush in the courtyard or neatly tucked away behind the entertainment center. After finding the oxygen tank, I would do my best to try to convince Mr. Gill, please use your oxygen, I would say. I'd always be appealing to his rational mind. I didn't understand. He would respond, it ain't no good. I would then wrestle with them with this foreign oxygen contraption to put it back on. Then I would train him in both the benefits and the medical necessity of always wearing the oxygen tank. Mr. Gill, I would say, do you feel the air coming out of the small tube? This air helps you breathe, and without it, you would get sick. Don't you understand? And he would nod reluctantly. A few minutes later, I would find the tank behind the fish tank. I would bring it back to him and try once again to explain all the benefits and the necessities of wearing it. And this went on for many weeks. A brutal struggle between two strong personalities, me, the diligent caretaker, and he, my sullen charge. One day it all came to a head. Mr. Gill, put your oxygen on, I said in a weary, forlorn, very tired voice. Take it back, he growled. Mr. Gill, if you don't put your oxygen tank back on right now, you will literally die, I said despondently and very theatrically, while coming beside him and attaching the oxygen tank under his nose once more. It ain't working. I didn't understand what he was trying to tell me. I put the tube against his face again so he could feel the air moving, and I tried my best to show him that it indeed was working. He then began to vigorously roll the oxygen tank back and forth against the carpeted floor. I told you, it ain't working. Take it back, he said to me. His blue eyes were flashing red with frustration. After weeks of fighting with Mr. Gill about the importance of using his oxygen tank, after many lengthy discussions and whiteboard demonstrations to try to get him to understand the importance of this medical equipment, it finally all came together. Mr. Gill was convinced that the contraption that I gave him to use, that I am forcing him to use, was not an oxygen tank, but in fact was a vacuum cleaner. He could not see any reason to carry the vacuum cleaner around if it did not pick up dirt off the carpeted floor. Mr. Gill thought that I was giving him the job of vacuuming the halls, and he could not understand why he should be doing so if the vacuum cleaner was not picking up any dirt. It ain't working. You don't understand, boy. Mr. Guilford and I had a failure in communication. His frustration and my frustration were over the same thing. It was an inability to communicate with each other. We were both talking, we were both using words, but I was unable to understand what he was trying to tell me because I misunderstood the disease. that he was suffering from. His rational mind was impaired. I didn't understand that. And I needed to do the legwork to find a creative solution for both of us. People with dementia are often frustrated because they have lost the ability to communicate with the world. The world in their mind is hazy and blurry, and the vocabulary they're trying to use is at best imprecise and scattered. So to care for those with dementia, we must learn how to think creatively and teach our family members and our caretakers to do so as well. So the first lesson towards building better care commitments is do not assume that you're using the same language. Our mindset as a caretaker should be like that of a tourist. Say I came and visited one of your countries. I don't understand the customs. I don't understand the local language. And I need to use every resource available to make any progress with getting around the best that I can. In this story, Mr. Guilford's frustration was based on his own ineffectiveness. He could not get the vacuum to work properly. In his mind, I'd given him a very simple job to do, a job that he's probably done thousands of times. But the tool I gave him to complete the task was broken in his mind. The tool I wanted him to use just did not work. My repeated enforcing of him using the oxygen tank only increased his agitation and frustration. I later met with the nurse and met with his care team, and we developed other hardware options for Mr. Gill to use that wouldn't be connected with the spatial object of a vacuum. Oftentimes, our inability to think creatively, our lack of patience with those with dementia is the problem. So take the time to investigate the problem. Why is Dad mad today? Is something frustrating him? Am I doing something wrong? What's aggravating Mrs. Robertson? And this is particularly difficult for those who have had a stroke and are further limited in their ability to communicate verbally. And our patience and our kindness are just an essential part of our care. So adjusting expectations. As dementia progresses from mild to moderate to severe, communication becomes increasingly difficult. Where once a person with dementia would not stop asking repetitive questions, now they are increasingly withdrawn and quiet. I observed this most when a family member would visit a resident at the long-term care where I worked. The visitor and the resident would often both sit in awkward silence, wondering what to talk about next. After exhausting the family rundown, all the gossip, and the political conversation of the day, the visitor would sigh, tap the knee of their loved one, perhaps give a hug, express their affection, then get up and walk out the door. And I always felt bad for the visitor because they could only see the wreckage of the dementia on their loved ones, not on their still present capabilities. Uncle Larry, who they just had proclaimed had gone really downhill, beat me in a game of checkers about an hour ago while scolding me that I was too critical of former President Richard Nixon. When caretakers only focus on the inability of their loved ones, it ruins the opportunity for a new relationship in this phase of life. Instead of coming closer to the person experiencing dementia, their friends and loved ones pull away in despair. They are so busy mourning the loss of the person who once was that they cannot see the person who is sitting in front of them. If we approach this disease as a disability with challenges and rewards, instead of purely a sickness, we can start the relationship anew from where they are now. So be aware that this garbling of thoughts does not extend into all areas of conversation. Many people experiencing dementia can still remember multiple verses of song lyrics, of quotations, of biographical anecdotes. Perhaps you watched the video of the ballerina dancing to some music while she was sitting in her chair. It's incredible. One of the principles of the Best Friends Dementia Patient Bill of Rights states, to be with individuals who know one's life story, including cultural and spiritual traditions. Being familiar with key words from an extended general knowledge of who they are as a person can help unlock this puzzle. For instance, one of my residents was always looking for someone named Hans, and she would cry, walk with her walker all over the facility, calling out for Hans. My coworker asked questions and researched who was this Hans. And it helped us formulate a better answer for the location and the biographical history of Hans. Turns out he was her older brother, and he had lived and died in Germany decades ago. We found out that he was a police officer, so we began to respond that Hans was working at the police station and would be home later. You can add your German pronunciation to that. You may feel uncomfortable with the therapeutic lie, but realize what really is taking place in this lady's mind as she is searching for her brother. Her intuitive mind is screaming at her that something is wrong with her and her family. So she feels lonely and afraid and displaced, and her intuitive mind is very troubled. So we use our properly functioning rational mind to offer her comfort. She does not need biographical information or facts about her family at this time. She does not need for us to sit down with pictures of the graveyard where her brother is buried. Instead, she needs a loving caretaker to speak comfort, to bring comforting, informed words to her, to comfort her soul. So a second care commitment for us to understand is that we must speak shared words to each other. Because I know this lady's life story, I was able to craft an answer to help bring her comfort intuitively. The longer you work with people with dementia, the more you realize that certain words, phrases, songs sparks an interaction in a surprising way. For example, my conversation with Mr. Robbie about President Nixon, about the railroad community here in town. Even though we may not speak to each other with perfect clarity, there's still plenty of communication that can take place between friends. As Mr. Robbie and I talk about former President Richard Nixon, about the state of Tennessee, about the city of Louisville, about railroads, I find an inexhaustible amount of conversation topics to explore. And often I feel like a miner going into the mines of my friend, searching for the hidden soul. The more we talk, the more we explore, the more the soul is exposed. And they reveal new depths in the world around me. I would lead the way in conversation, but they would come along and provide the harmony to my melody. A caretaker can brighten the day of a person experiencing dementia by reminiscing over popular quotes, by song lyrics, or the national pledge. These build shared emotional value, and the fog rolls back in their brain a little bit, and the suffering individual receives a feeling of value. They may not be able to remember what they ate for lunch, but they can still remember a song lyric from 60, 70 years ago. And that's important, and that's worth sharing. If a person has a shared religious background, a time of communication on spiritual themes can also be a place for particularly sweet reflection. Sometimes quoting passages of scripture or the Lord's Prayer or the call to prayer can be a powerful moment. And when we take it slowly and repeatedly give them a chance to let the fog lift, if the psalm or the prayer does not take, it doesn't work, move on to a different passage, song, lyric, or creed. On most occasions, those with Alzheimer's, even in advanced stages, can still remember old hymns, the Lord's Prayer, or Hail Mary, or whatever would be the case in your culture. In conclusion, growing in our knowledge of the disease and knowing the individual we are caring for are two essential elements in providing great person-centered care. Intimacy with an individual is not enough if we do not understand what is taking place internally. That just leads towards frustration. This just leads towards frustration and embarrassment. However, an exhaustive knowledge of the disease does nothing to build emotional connectivity between the caretaker and the person experiencing dementia. We must have both, and we must train people to do both. We must have knowledgeable, loving caretakers fully invested in the security and the flourishing of the person experiencing dementia. I'm going to finish with a few person-centered practices for people experiencing dementia that I wrote. The Best Friends Dementia Bill of Rights is very popular in facilities in America. However, I find it to be a little bit medical, to be more geared towards the medical community and their care practices. And so what I came up with are some practices that I think would be helpful for caretakers, for people who are at home in low resource communities, to be able to practices to live by and to guide their family members through. So I'm just gonna read these through to you as we finish up here. So person-centered practice number 1, to see people experiencing dementia as cherished individuals, regardless of the muting of the disease. Next, to help bring exposure to the souls of the ones we care for by participating in games, play, songs, and dance. Next, to choose joy in the present with our loved ones, instead of focusing on the despair of the life that once was. To challenge ourselves to learn to speak their language and their customs, instead of asking them to perform complicated tasks that they cannot complete. To simplify our customs and life practices, as well as our homes and communities, so they can excel without unnecessary frustration. Last slide. To care about their stories and their songs enough to sit still, boy, how difficult is this, and actively listen, to ask those good questions, to build that library of keywords that works, that shared words that work. To know that even though dementia has damaged their mental faculties, the disease has not changed the person experiencing dementia's need for assurance, for safety, for support. To fight for the retention of their basic human rights and dignity for all of their lives, for as long as possible. Lastly, to err on the side of the social, medical, and relational freedom of the individual, although the easier path is to restrain through medicine, restrain through outings, restrained through pulling them away from some of their community to be able to work towards getting them to engage. So thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, please let me know. Just to rehash some of my background, with what we're doing right now, Firm Foundation is trying to enter some of these low resources communities in Malaysia, some of these villages and some of those areas, and trying to provide tools like I just laid out in order to equip villages to be able to help take care of their loved ones. So yeah, if you have any questions, please let me know or send me an email, and I'd love to talk some more. Thank you very much.
Hi.
Hello.
Yeah. Have you tried the cognitive stimulation therapy for person to person? For the basically the to take care of the people with dementia?
I'm not really familiar with that title. Possibly.
It's called cognitive stimulative therapy.
Oh,
CT.
possibly. I'm sorry.
Like we have cognitive behavioral therapy. That way they have, especially for the dementia patients, they have the cognitive stimulative therapy. And that works with the in a group therapy also, and in individual therapy also.
Okay. Yeah. This is what I love about this conference, and so thankful for the presenters, is it provides a worldwide view of what's going on, and I'm so grateful for it. And I'm going to write that down to do some research, because
in UK, in London, they have done a lot of work there, and in India also, in Chennai, we have started working with that.
Okay. And
it's giving basically, helping them to deal with the day-to-day situation more in a better way.
Okay.
So, like you said, that you had a communicate. When you communicate, you have a difficulty. They don't understand. So, with these therapy, they are able to manage themselves on their own.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I will definitely. I'll do some research into that. That's exciting.
Yeah,
so, thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Dr. Shilpa.
Thank you.
Any more questions for Matthew Kuiper? Okay, I think no questions, right?
Thank you, everyone.